Good morning, and welcome to this second in-person outdoor gathering of our All Souls congregation during this pandemic season. I am so grateful to see all of you here today, and so grateful for this lovely day. For the past 80-some years, the second weekend in October has been celebrated as Columbus Day, a federal holiday honoring the Italian navigator who demonstrated to Europeans the existence of this hemisphere and began its exploitation. Since the early 1970s, historians and citizens have expressed concern about celebrating Columbus's cruel and high-handed colonialist treatment of the indigenous peoples he encountered in North America during his voyages. Many have suggested transforming this holiday into an opportunity to lift up and celebrate the heritage and contributions of Native American tribal nations, retitling it Indigenous Peoples Day. In the past decade, concerns of contemporary Native Americans have made headlines, with the discovery of unmarked children's graves at former Indian boarding schools in the United States and Canada, with the protests over oil pipeline construction through what remains of Indian territory, with the demand for recognition of Native sovereignty and treaty enforcement, and with the increasing objection to caricatured Native American sports mascots. Our Unitarian Universalist principles, recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of all people, the rights of free conscience and the democratic process, and the interdependent web of existence, call upon us to be accountable for our own participation in the culture of colonial dominance and privilege, and to advocate for justice and respect for the rights and heritage of contemporary tribal peoples. This morning we lift up issues of concern to these Native communities and add our witness to those speaking out in support of our indigenous neighbors. May our symbolic chalice flame reflect the many sacred fires of diverse American Indian nations and traditions, illuminating our common reverence for nature's abundance, for beauty and harmony in the world, for communities of equity and respect among people, and for the power of spirit to heal and bless our lives. Chuck, will you remind us all of our covenant promises in this congregation?
Goodwill is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Thank you. In April of 2016, the Standing Rock Sioux tribe stood up against the titans of industry to protect their region's water and sacred burial grounds from the Dakota Access Pipeline. Although tribes and residents of tribal lands are often told that these oil pipelines are safe, there are countless oil leaks every year across the world that cause tremendous damage and destruction to plants, wildlife, and water. Carol Lindstrom, a citizen of the Turtle Mountain Band of Ojibwe, wrote this story to honor the Standing Rock water protectors and to share this historical movement with the world. Michaela Gady drew the beautiful pictures of indigenous people and their traditional teachings. In Ojibwe culture, men are the protectors of fire and women are the protectors of water. This is the story of the water protectors. Water is the first medicine, my Nokomis, my grandmother, told me. We come from water. It nourished us inside our mother's body as it nourishes us here on Mother Earth. Water is sacred, she said. We stand with our songs and our drums. We are still here. You can count the people. There are 5 of them in this picture. The river's rhythm runs through my veins, runs through my people's veins. My people talk of a black snake that will destroy the land, spoil the water, poison plants and animals, wreck everything in its path. When my people first spoke of the black snake, they foretold that it wouldn't come for many, many years. Now, the black snake is here. Its venom burns the land, courses through the water, making it unfit to drink. Take courage. I must keep the black snake away from my village's water. I must rally my people together to stand for the water, to stand for the land, to stand as one against the black snake. And you can see in this picture she's put on her ribbon skirt, which is a source of power. We stand with our songs and our drums. We are still here. Can you see that there are 6 people now in that picture? It will not be easy. We fight for those who cannot fight for themselves, the winged ones, the crawling ones, the 4-legged, the 2-legged, the plants, trees, rivers, lakes, the earth, for we are all related. Tears like waterfalls stream down, tracks down my face, tracks down my people's faces. Water has its own spirit, Nokomis told me. Water is alive. Water remembers our ancestors who came before us, she said. We stand with our songs and our drums. We are still here. Now there's 8 people in the circle. Right? We are stewards of the earth. Our spirits have not been broken. We are water protectors. We stand. The black snake is in for the fight of its life. What started out as a camp made up of a few tribal members near the Cannonball River in Fort Yates, South Dakota, would eventually grow into a movement that brought together more than 500 indigenous nations from all over the world to stand for clean water. Sadly, despite the fierce protests, construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline moved forward. Unfortunately, but predictably, there were leaks before its construction was even complete. Like the Standing Rock Sioux, many tribes and their allies continue to fight pipelines on a daily basis. They say, "We stand with our strong songs and our drums. We are still here." Speaking of drums,
I forgot we got a microphone here in front of me. So we're going to do a little participating rhythmic session here. We're going to be reminded how therapeutic here this is today under this blue sky and involved with Mother Earth today. I think this is very fitting for this occasion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a little clapping beat. And as soon as everybody starts clapping along in unison, I'm going to jump in. And since this is more about you today than me, I'm going to be sitting down to do this, and I'm going to be accompanying you today. So this is more about all of us together and sharing this energy under this great sky today. So I will get started, and you can follow me here. That's what I'm talking about. Everybody coming together to make one sound. All of that energy coming together. That's what I loved, and I could feel every bit of it up here. I don't know if you guys could feel it out there too, but just a little simple rhythmic clapping, everybody together, just very good.
It's true that a great accompanist can make even the simplest song sound great. And now the children are welcome to depart upstairs, and Shanna and Darrington are going to sing them out.
Go now in peace, may love guide all your ways. Beauty be the blessing of your nights and days. Truth on your lips and kindness in your deeds. Faith to follow where the human spirit leads.
From honoring original indigenous inhabitants from the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indians. Land acknowledgement is a traditional custom that dates back centuries in many Native nations and communities. Today, land acknowledgements are used by Native peoples and non-Natives to recognize indigenous peoples who are the original stewards of the lands on which we now live. After millennia of Native history and centuries of displacement and dispossession, acknowledging original indigenous inhabitants is complex. Many places in the Americas have been home to different Native nations over time, and many indigenous people no longer live on lands to which they have ancestral ties. Even so, Native nations, communities, families, and individuals today sustain their sense of belonging to ancestral homelands and protect those connections through indigenous languages, oral traditions, ceremonies, and other forms of cultural expression. The U.S. Supreme Court has acknowledged that tribal governments are the oldest sovereigns in the continent. As sovereign entities, Indian nations are guaranteed the power and right to determine their own form of government, to define citizenship, to make and enforce laws through their own police force and courts, to collect taxes and regulate property use. Speaking and hearing words of recognition is an important step in creating collaborative, accountable, continuous, and respectful relationships with indigenous nations and communities.
Like many other practices in various Native American cultures, the act of land acknowledgement has its origin in gratitude. Long before European settlers had anything to apologize for, many tribal events and gatherings in North America began with prayers of thanks for the gifts of creation and with formal recognition of the peoples who were present and who historically inhabited that place of meeting. Like a guest expressing appreciation to a host, it was only courteous to acknowledge the provenance of that particular land, to situate the current event in a specific space amidst the vast shared living environment and cultural memory. As colonial powers have come to dominate the territories of North America over the past 5 centuries, much of the connection between tribal people and their ancestral lands has been disregarded. Western concepts of private property ownership, foreign to the ways in which many indigenous people thought about land rights, were imposed by force and violence. Settler greed and ignorance could not appreciate the social and ecological sustainability of traditional Indian land management practices. Areas were seized by military conquest, claimed by state edict, assigned by treaties that were disregarded when they became inconvenient to the colonial powers, seeded by puppet tribal governments that did not represent their supposed tribes, or acquired by fraud. Native peoples who survived centuries of disease and displacement were regarded as ongoing nuisances to be disposed of. In this historical context, land acknowledgements can now only be offered with the growing awareness of how particular places have come into the possession of settler communities. This is uncomfortable knowledge, difficult to reconstruct historically because so many people do not want to know, and also disturbing to the peace of mind of those of us who benefit from the thefts committed by our ancestors. Yet, if there is to be any hope of right relations, it is essential to be aware, first, that Native American people and tribes have not disappeared, but continue to exist as a vital part of 21st century national society. As genocidal as the intent of many settler behaviors may have been, they failed. Through personal courage, persistence, and wisdom, as well as cultural endurance and resilience, Native peoples continue to practice and to adapt their traditions to the current day. They struggle with the same contemporary issues that impact us all, and they often carry in their minds and hearts a sense of ancient connection to particular lands that their ancestors once occupied. That connection is a source of pride, identity, and comfort, as well as anger and loss. Properly offered, a contemporary land acknowledgement centers not the shame and guilt of settler communities, but rather the endurance of that connection of people to land across the generations, lifting up the strength and self-respect it provides to indigenous communities in the present day. The practice of land acknowledgement also recognizes that part of healing from trauma is to name the trauma and to be validated by others that the injury was and is real. This does not undo the harm, but it mitigates the sense of confusion and unreality that makes it difficult for healing to begin. Naming violence, death, and broken promises as true history moves us all out of denial to a place of new possibility, where we can shift our collective energy from covering up what happened to finding a better way forward toward thriving and self-determination for indigenous people today. An example of this truth-telling is the 1964 song by Johnny Cash, which Darrington, Shanna, and Isaac Robinson are going to sing for us in a moment. But first, I would invite you to join together in these words of acknowledgement suggested by representatives of the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian. Will you please repeat after me, softly or in your heart? We gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we now gather, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities
who
make their homes here today.
As long
as
as the moon
the moon
shall rise,
as the moon shall rise,
as long
as
the river flow,
as the rivers flow,
as long as the sun
will shine,
as long
as the grass shall grow,
The Senecas are an Indian tribe of the Iroquois Nation. Down on the New York-Pennsylvania line, you'll find their reservation. After the U.S. Revolution, Corn Planter was the chief. He told the tribe these men they could trust. That was his true belief. He went down to Independence Hall, and there a treaty signed that promised peace with the USA and Indian rights combined. George Washington gave his signature, the government gave its hand. They said that now and forevermore that this was Indian land.
As long
as
the moon shall rise,
as the moon shall rise,
as long
as
the rivers
flow,
flow,
the rivers flow,
as long as the sun will shine, as long
as the grass shall grow.
On the Seneca Reservation, there is much sadness now. Washington's treaty has been broken, and there is no hope, no how. Across the Allegheny River, they're throwing up a dam. It will flood the Indian country. A proud day for Uncle Sam. It has broke the ancient treaty with a politician's grin. It will drown the Indian graveyards. Corn Planter, can you swim? The earth is mother to the Senecas. They're trampling sacred ground. Change the mint green earth to black mud flats as honor hobbles down.
as long
as
the moon shall rise,
as the moon shall rise,
as long
as
the rivers flow,
as the rivers flow,
as long as the sun will shine,
as long as the grass shall grow.
The Iroquois Indians used to rule from Canada way south. But no one fears the Indians now and smiles the liar's mouth. The Senecas hired an expert to figure another site. But the great good army engineers said that he had no right. Although he showed them another plan and showed them another way. They laughed in his face and said no deal, Kanzua Dam's here to stay. Congress turned the Indians down, brushed off the Indians' plea. So the Senecas have renamed the dam. They call it Lake Perfidy.
as long
As
the moon
shall rise,
shall rise,
as the moon shall rise,
as long
as
the rivers
the rivers
flow,
as the rivers flow,
as long as the sun will shine, as
long as the grass shall grow.
Washington, Adams, and Kennedy now hear their pledges ring. The treaties are safe, we'll keep our word, but what is that gurgling? It's a backwater from the Perfidy Lake. It's rising all the time. Over the homes, and over the fields, and over the promises fine. No boats will sail on Lake Perfidy. In winter, it will fill. In summer, it will be a swamp, and all. But the government of the USA has corrected George's vow. The father of our country must be wrong. What's an Indian, anyhow?
as long
As
as the moon
the moon
shall rise,
as the moon
rivers
as the rivers
flow,
as the rivers flow,
as long as the sun will shine, as long
as the grass shall grow.
Thank you. From the Hidden Agenda by Brenda Child, published in the Washington Post, August 2021. The discovery of mass graves of children in Canada has shocked many non-Indians. The damn Indian boarding schools are a distant and relatively unknown chapter. They may wonder what will be uncovered here in the United States that this country has collectively forgotten or failed to learn. American Indian scholars have spent decades researching and calling attention to students' deaths from tuberculosis and the influenza pandemic of 1918, documented in records of global schools. Indian education in both the United States and Canada originated from the same colonial project, one that imposed private property rights and Christianity on indigenous peoples at a time when their lands and resources were viewed as merely ripe for plunder. Beginning with Carlisle in Pennsylvania in 1879 and ending with the Sherman Institute in California in 1903, a period of 24 years. The U.S. government operated 25 off-reservation boarding schools. Some religious denominations also opened their own mission schools. At the same time, a massive dispossession took place in the form of the General Allotment Act, which authorized the President to survey and divide Indian lands. Boarding schools, designed to re-educate Indian youth who would no longer have a tribal homeland, went hand in hand with this genocidal policy. Perhaps, like the Trail of Tears or Wounded Knee, the boarding school is symbolic of American colonialism at its most genocidal. The system's start coincided with the end of the Indian Wars. The oldest and best-known school, Carlisle, was once a military establishment. Boarding schools aligned federal authority with the zealotry of religious missions. They depended on national and local authorities, including police, to abduct and remove children from their parents. They suppressed Indian culture while opening the door to alienation from their land and the extension of Anglo-American culture into the lives and souls of Indian people. Boarding school, with its links to all these institutions and abuses, functions as a potent political metaphor for colonialism itself.
The numbers are overwhelming, numbing. What is there to say about 751 children's bodies, or 1,300, or whatever the next evidence will bring to light? Little bones, light as feathers. Too little food, too much work, too cold, too lonely, too far away from mother's arms and father's protection, too lightly discarded as collateral damage in the white colonial project of so-called civilization. The bonds of family and community were resilient and strong among the native people. It was always a frustration for the white governments. No matter how carefully they taught the people they called savages and uncivilized, as soon as those natives got back to their heritage languages and relationships and lifestyles, it all went out the window. They wouldn't farm. They wouldn't set up businesses for money. They wouldn't do things properly, the white way. Above all, they wouldn't sell the land. The land. The land that the colonial settlers wanted, needed, had to have at any cost. Everywhere that white authority poked at tribal culture, it persisted. So they decided to start with the children. Uproot them, separate them, cut them off from their languages and their roots in the land with violence, like cutting off their braids. The children were taken by force, if necessary, to distant industrial training schools, where they were instructed in farm and factory labor and heavy housekeeping, like laundry. Instructed in the English language, the Christian religion, the culture of colonial powers. They died, as indigenous people always have, of diseases, crowded, ill-clothed, ill-fed, ill-housed, vulnerable to outbreaks of measles, influenza, and tuberculosis. They died of despair by suicide and by trying to run away back to their own people. School authorities had no investment in returning the bodies of children to their native communities or even informing their parents of the deaths. Instead, they kept the very graves confined to school grounds, marked with cheap wooden or fragile iron crosses, if they were marked at all. Record keeping was sloppy. Native names were often not used. Unlike other parts of the same cemeteries, these grounds were not tended. The markers rusted and rotted in the span of a very few years, leaving the graves without identification. In death, as in life, no one in power cared. Only in the memories of the other children who saw and survived were the stories carried down the generations. Often enough, the settler people who ran these places also died. Nuns, priests, administrators, teachers, and were also buried on school grounds. Their resting places were marked with lasting stones. So it was for the Reverend Thomas Johnson, a Methodist minister, who in October of 1839 opened a mission school where the Santa Fe Trail passed through Shawnee lands in what is now Johnson County, Kansas. He envisioned a manual training institution for children of a variety of Indian tribes, including the Kaw or Kansa, Munsee, Delaware, Ottawa, Chippewa, Oto, Osage, Cherokee, Peoria, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Wea, Gros Ventres, Omaha, and Wyandotte. At the height of its activity, he presided over an establishment of more than 2,000 acres with 16 buildings, including the 3 large brick structures which still stand there, and an enrollment of nearly 200 Indian boys and girls from the ages of 5 to 23. The school had a relatively brief existence. It closed in 1862, probably because the Methodist Church lost interest in sponsoring it financially during the American Civil War. Reverend Johnson himself was murdered by Southern sympathizers who suspected him of loyalty to the Union in 1865, and he was buried in the Shawnee Methodist Mission Cemetery, along with several members of his family. Those graves, enduringly marked and respected, can still be seen near Mission Road and Shawnee Mission Parkway. But I can't help wondering, are there little heaps of children's bones hidden somewhere here in our own city's backyard? tiny, broken sparrows and crushed, awkward fawns who never returned to their families from Thomas Johnson's Methodist clutches, escaping only into death. Do you know? Would you know? If it were so, what would we owe them? A debt of sorrow, of memory, a debt of honor. What would we owe to their families and their communities who carry the legacy of this trauma in their living bodies? We cannot undo history, of course. We cannot reknit those buried bones into breathing children. We cannot erase the memories of hunger and loneliness, abuse and exploitation, and severed identity that haunt their surviving cousins. What we can do is to ask the questions and face into the answers. Now, today, with unflinching gaze and sincere regret. We can pay for the research as if it were our own beloveds lying swept aside and forgotten. We can open the embarrassing records and offer them back, those little bones, so that they might be returned too late to the land and the people where they belong, where they have been long sought and beloved and never forgotten. Haunt us, O little ones, with the breeze of your stolen breath. Startle us in the puppy's play, in the squirrel's easy jump, in the wren's bright eyes. May our hearts go out to you in memory as your captors' hearts never did. May the space where your lives ought to have been convict us and put all our self-righteousness and privilege to flight. May every bone be found as silent testimony and find a place of peace and honor to rest at last in the embrace of native earth. We are sorry. We are sorry. We are sorry.
Every face is in you, every voice, every sorrow in you, every pity, every love, every memory woven into fire. Every breath is in you, every cry, every longing in you, every singing, every hope, every healing woven into fire. Every heart is in you, every tongue
statement to the Kansas City football team from Not in Our Honor from this past September 10th. Kansas City's football team name was chosen in 1963 to honor a mayor nicknamed the Chief, due to his founding of an imaginary Boy Scout Indian tribe. This occurred before the Civil Rights Movement and before the American Indian Civil Rights Movement in the 1970s. For decades, hundreds of tribes, national Indian organizations, and professional organizations have spoken out on this matter. In 2005, the American Psychological Association called for the immediate retirement of all American Indian mascots, symbols, images, and personalities by schools, colleges, universities, athletic teams, and organizations, stating, "Research has shown that the continued use of American Indian mascots, symbols, images, and personalities has a negative effect on not only American Indian students, but all students." Not in Our Honor is a coalition of local Native American leaders and American Indian organizations in the Kansas City metropolitan area who have been speaking out against the use of Native American stereotypes and misappropriation of Native American culture. The decision of the Kansas City football team to remove the horse war paint from the games, in addition to last year prohibiting fans from wearing headdresses and face paint styled in a way that references or appropriates American Indian cultures and traditions, is another step in the right direction. While it may address the more blatant racist behaviors in the stadium, it does not address the overall racism and appropriation of Native culture inherent in utilizing a race of people as a mascot. It is also a disservice to the fans. While misguided at best, the fans are trying to support their team. By identifying some behaviors as too offensive, while reserving some behaviors, for instance the tomahawk chop, for review, the team not only robs fans of the full fan experience, they have made the determination that some racism is okay, but blatant racism is not. Banning these behaviors is unlikely to stop devout fans from continuing to don headdresses and face paint in the parking lot, nor will it prevent the opposing team from racist behavior. The opposing team will still use the same offensive signs and verbiage that they have used for many years, such as "send them back to the reservation," "scalp them," and "trail of tears." Not in Our Honor will continue our protest outside the stadium, in addition to other signage around the city. This is what we ask. Cease the use of racialized Native American branding by eliminating any and all imagery evocative of Native American culture, traditions, and spirituality from their team franchise, including the logo. This includes the use of Native terms, drum, arrows, or monikers that assume the presence of a Native American culture. Apply the NFL's zero tolerance for on-field use of racial and homophobic slurs to all races and ethnic groups, especially Native people.
Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, claims the old nursery rhyme. But we know that this is just not true. We have learned from our lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender friends just how much words can hurt when they make you feel invisible or inferior because of who you are. Being called by names or pronouns that no longer feel like your own can sting. Being referred to by an ethnic or racial slur can trigger a cascade of memories that ties your stomach in knots. Being snickered at or made fun of by a group that clearly takes pleasure in your distress can make you want to crawl in a hole. I know. A random stranger observing that they like specific parts of your body can make an ordinary moment feel suddenly and deeply unsafe, even when the speaker seeks to shrug it off as a compliment or just a joke. We know better, you and I. It's no joke what is going through their heads when they urge you to smile, baby. And the threat is understood, whether or not it is specified. So it is with Native American sports mascots. Their generic quality suggests that all Indians look the same and can be substituted for one another randomly, or that they all have certain characteristics like ferocity or stealth or greed. We find such generalizations offensive if spoken of racial groups like blacks or religious minorities like Jews. Why should we be okay with them in reference to our indigenous neighbors? I remember fighting this battle about the use of men as a generic pronoun for all humans, both male and female. I remember what it felt like to be made invisible when I had specifically asked for that not to happen. I remember calculating in one instance after another whether it was worth making a scene about this one time around, or whether it was better or easier to just let it go and swallow my discomfort. But that discomfort, while minor and manageable in any given moment, accumulates in your system and becomes toxic. When privileged people argue with you about whether or not your discomfort is justified, again and again, it poisons something inside you. The awareness that your pain and sadness counts for less than the inconvenience of having to change old habits just makes the day always a little harder and heavier. This might appear to be a trivial matter compared to thousands of indigenous children dead at the hands of their white captors, but both are fruit of the same tree of cultural dominance. Both arise out of the same message. To be Indian is to be other, is to be something not quite human. In our own case, the history of the Kansas City Chiefs is even more complicated, originating as it does in a white man's appropriation of Native culture to enact for white children. H. Roe Bartle's intention was to inspire his Boy Scout troops to strive for special status in his made-up tribe of Micosse. Rhonda Lavaldo, a faculty member at Haskell Indian Nations University in Lawrence, observes that the Boy Scouts whitewash Native dances and call it the Indian way, when in reality there are over 500 tribes, each with unique languages, ceremonies, and dances. She said, "You can't lump them all into one and say it's okay to keep perpetuating stereotypes." Because Bartle, a past mayor of Kansas City, was instrumental in bringing the former Texans football team here in 1962, the team was renamed the Chiefs in honor of Bartle's own nickname, the Chief. The history is complex, but one thing is simple. There is no amount of racist cultural appropriation that is small enough to be okay. When marginalized people tell us that certain images and locutions are painful to them, the courteous and proper thing to do is to find alternatives. Indigenous communities and their cultures are not mascots for the amusement of white settler children and sports fans. Such caricatures are a source of pain, not honor, say many Indians. If you really want to honor them, learn the truth of their history and their present status. study the political, philosophical, and ecological ideas that actually underlie their ceremonies and dances. Don't just adopt the superficial trappings because you think they look cooler than the rituals of disembodied Protestant Christianity. Our own Kansas City area includes the ancestral lands of the Osage, the Kaw or Kansa, and Oto Missouria, part of the Osseti Sacoan or Sioux people. During the 1830s, the Shawnee, Wyandot, Delaware, Potawatomi, Sac and Fox, and Kickapoo were forcibly relocated to the region, each a community with its own history and traditions. A few decades later, many of these nations were forced to move again. There are no longer any recognized tribal lands in Missouri due to the Indian Removal Act of 1830. Today, Native Americans make up only about 0.5% of the population in Kansas City and the surrounding communities. The Kansas City Indian Center is located in the Westport area, not far from here. First formed as a social club to help retain cultural practices among Indians being relocated to urban areas, it was incorporated in 1971 as the area's only multi-purpose social service agency for American Indians. Jason Swartley, a member of the Santee Sioux Nation, serves as their emergency assistance and food pantry coordinator, and he is here with us this morning to tell us more about the current work of the center and to invite our support. To avoid the risk of passing baskets from hand to hand, we ask that you bring your contribution here to the center as you leave the service or use the online app to give. Also, if you are able to grab a chair as you leave and take it up to the patio, that will be a great help. Bonus points if you can take 2. Jason, welcome. So I'll have some children involved. Okay. Tell us what you want us to know.
Oh, good morning. Or Hahana Wastay. Is this Impatu Wastay? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for this service, for inviting me here, for the kind words. I was not told much about what to say, but when good Dr. Reverend Gibbons told me she'd be talking about oil pipelines and missing and murdered indigenous people and boarding schools, closing out with the discussion of mascots and stereotypes, and I said, how long are you going to be talking?
You're right.
Good luck, because those are all big topics, right, that we could talk about for a very long time. And I won't. But I think just to kind of tie that all in with the center and kind of the work that we're doing and kind of what our lives have been like, I think I'll kind of probably touch on all of those a little bit. I think we've covered the kind of the history of the center and what we are and who we are a little bit. We are a part of the Our Honor Coalition. We will be out at the game just east of town here this afternoon with Rhonda Lavaldo and her group. We'll be meeting out there to, as we do with most home games, if we're able to stand and just make our voices heard. This is a busy time of year for us, just for all Native people, really. And it seems like this year especially has been just a series, and we know it's coming. We know kind of as summer comes to an end, we know that football season's starting up, and here in Kansas City, that's been a battle for the past 2 decades, and important to recognize that that is not just a Kansas City battle. That is part of a larger battle that's been taking place across the country, not just at the professional level, but there are the NCAA has taken great strides a few years ago in kind of banning that among their schools. The biggest offenders we see now, sadly, are young children. There are elementary schools that have the mascot Redskins, which is a dictionary-defined racial slur, and there's just kids being brought up with that, and that's sad to see. And so this is some of the work that we're trying to do. Again, not just picking on them, but they really are setting an example. There's not a kid in Kansas City that doesn't want to grow up and be like those guys, and so they have a lot of responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility. Is that what Spider-Man is calling out? Something like that, right? And so it is important that we address that, and so we do a lot of work this time of year on that issue. With the situation in Canada, there's been just a huge national reckoning up there in terms of examining their own history, realizing what happened, realizing how much history so much of the country doesn't know and doesn't understand, and that's been difficult for a lot of people, I think, to come to realization with that. I think it's been less here in this country because honestly, I don't think this country is ready. This country is debating if we should teach slavery in schools because it makes some kids feel bad, right? I mean, that's where we are. But that history happened here as well. There's not been the exploration that there has been up north thus far. There was a bill introduced by Deb Haaland, Promo Nation, I believe she is, Secretary of the Interior, is looking to search, use the caveat, government-run boarding schools. They are going to be searching those. That will not include the school here in Shawnee Mission because it was run by the church. And so there was a bill introduced by our own Therese Davids last week, actually, to expand that search to all schools, not just the ones in the post-Carlisle era. So that would be a way that you could, looking for a tangible plan of action, you can help just let your representatives know that that's something that you'd like to see happen, and that helps out a lot. And so that's been something we're dealing with this fall. We did a big event on September 30th on Shirt Day, just in support of the Truth and Reconciliation Day they did up in Canada. We had a big event out in Olathe. Selected a site along the Potawatomi Trail of Tears just to do kind of a ceremony and a bit of remembrance there for that. Missing and murdered Indigenous women is, of course, always a problem. We had a group come through a couple weeks ago. A group of my people from the Spirit Lake tribe that were actually running and walking across the country just to kind of raise awareness and visiting various groups. And they arrived in Washington, D.C., I think also last week or maybe a week before. Met with Deb Haaland. We're trying to meet with the Vice President or the President and just kind of speak with them and bring more awareness to this issue because it's a problem. There was a big case recently, which is still unresolved, right? This beautiful girl went missing in Wyoming, right? And we're still seeking the final resolution on that. And just, unending worldwide press coverage of that, right? And I followed that. That was a compelling case. It was just heart-wrenching to hear this story, and just, I think the first time we all heard it, we kind of knew there's no way there could be a good way that turns out, more than likely. And that's that. And I don't have a problem with how much press coverage that received and how much media attention and how many people were so engaged in that, and so many people in that area just dropped everything they were doing and said, we got to go find this girl, right? Because that's what should happen. I'd like to think we live in a country where if a child went missing, or even if she's 22 years old, she's still someone's child, people would drop what they're doing and go look for her. But in that same area where she went missing, in the decade prior to that, there had been 710 missing persons cases, 466 of them Indigenous women. And we don't know their faces, we don't know their names. No one dropped what they were doing to go look for them. So there's problems. A study of these situations found that if white people go missing after a month, 11% of those people are still missing. We're talking about minorities, that figures 21%. And so there's just systemic differences in how, much bigger issue, right? Systemic differences in how people are treated based on factors that shouldn't matter, right? And it's not just that; it's many other areas of life. And so that's a battle we've been fighting this fall. Here in a couple weeks, well, already starting. My son went out to his first Halloween party last night, so we get to again have the conversation and trying to remind people a race of people is not an appropriate costume. 2021, still saying that. Always some people haven't caught on. Coming up next month, we'll get to enjoy entire elementary school classrooms dressing up like Indians, right? That's still a thing. After class, you guys are the pilgrims, you guys are the Indians. Act out all the Indian stereotypes you've ever known in your young lives. And so we get to try and educate people on that. And then some things that you might not be aware of coming in December, particularly for my people, the Dakota Lakota Nation. December 26th marks the anniversary of the largest mass execution in United States history. Not a lot of people know about that. That was my ancestors, the Dakota 38, mass hanging in Mankato, Minnesota, 1862, the day after Christmas. And so that is something we do ceremonies about. There's actually a big horse ride I sometimes participate in, just kind of remembrance of that. And then December 29th, anybody know? That was the date of the Wounded Knee Massacre in South Dakota. Hundreds of mostly women and children gunned down by the 7th Cavalry. Celebrated today by the United States military as a great military victory, the Battle of Pine Ridge, they called it. 20 medals of honor, the highest honor awarded by our military, 20 issued to participants in that massacre. Despite repeated efforts, those medals have never been resented. That's more than any battle in World War II. And so it's kind of just a weird thing. I didn't know that history when I was younger, and just completely by coincidence, I got married on the 100th anniversary of the so that's kind of what we've been up to. That's kind of what we do this time of year, and we see it all summer. We know the dominoes are lining up, and this is a very difficult time. You know, each one of those things is just emotionally draining to go through. So any support we receive, like things like today, this is great. Thank you. We appreciate that. And we say thank you in a good way. We appreciate the kind words. We appreciate your support. What can you do? What you're doing is great. Just being willing to sit and listen, because so few people are. Just being willing to listen as we explain kind of our experiences and our ways and how we think about things is great. That's something you can do. I told you about the bill you can support. And just you have conversations all day long, right, with people about Native issues, about the sports team. Just be educated, just be an ally, just help us with those things. Those things all tie in together. People ask us all the time, one of the favorite objections we get, and we've heard them all, is, well, don't you have better things to do? Of all the things going wrong with your people, the state of your reservations, the people are all drunks. They swear they're not racist when they say that. Why are you out here, bothering us about this silly football thing? Well, it does matter. All those things matter. What those things all have in common is this belief that affects not just our people, but I think most everyone. What's now the majority of the country. If you're not a straight white male, you have had to fight to have your humanity recognized in this country, and you are still fighting for equality. And that's kind of where a great many of us are. And a lot of these things, like the sexualization of our young women and how many of them go missing, and end up killed, that is a symptom of the problem of native lives not being valued equally. The boarding school era, which is not as long ago as it sounds. The peak of the boarding school era was actually in the 1970s. This is a very recent thing that we're talking about. There's still many, many people alive today who survived that. How telling is it that we call the people who came out of that survivors and not graduates? But that's a symptom. That's a symptom of the prevailing force in an area believing that these people are less, and we need to do whatever we can. We need to break them. We need to keep them from being what they are. We need to kill the Indian, save the man, is what they said.
Jason, I want to give people an opportunity to share their support. Can you stick around and, chat with people afterwards?
I will just stay up here and
Yeah.
you gave me a microphone. I'm just going to keep talking.
All right. Well, I'd like to ask that justice and honor be renewed among all people, along with respect for the web of creation and compassion for all creatures. So may the ancient peoples of this land thrive and live in beauty, and may there be harmony upon the earth, as long as the moon shall rise, as long as the rivers flow, as long as the sun will shine, as long as the grass shall grow. So be it.
Okay. Do you want me to keep any of this upstairs or take it up? Just take it inside. Okay. Seeing you and hearing you.